So hey guys, my name is Ryan,
And I'm Reed.
and today we're going to go over the propositions with you on the California ballot for November 6th. Hopefully this can help you be a more informed voter, and we'll see. So for Proposition 1, we're looking at allocating authorized bonds to fund housing assistance programs. These bonds are coming from a pre-authorized pool of money the California general budget has set aside for us to use for programs like these. And it's our decision as voters as to how and how much, if any, that money will be spent. Most of this money will be going towards funding multifamily housing programs such as rental housing or apartment buildings.
The important clause in this to note is that in exchange for the developers getting low interest loans to develop or renovate these buildings, they're required to reserve the units for low-income individuals for up to 55 years. Assuming that there aren't any loopholes for private developers to get around this is an excellent plan in our opinion.
There are also funds set aside for projects to build housing and supportive infrastructure for that housing. Funds to encourage low and middle income home buyers to purchase homes with low interest rate loans, among other things. One of the other large allocations of funds is to veterans for home loan assistance.
Overall, we feel that while this is quite a large amount of money to pour into a program, one of California's largest issues is unaffordable housing. Proposition 1 accomplishes three main things. It develops houses for low-income families, it provides loans for low-income families to encourage them to become homeowners, and it also provides loans for veterans as well and to encourage them to become homeowners.
So overall, we feel this is a yes from us.
Proposition 2 is also a housing bill. It's another bill that is trying to tackle our ever-growing housing crisis we have here in California. But Prop 2 specifically is for aiding people who are mentally ill. And what it does is it reallocates funds from a 2004 act that went to mental health services and now puts that into housing instead of explicitly mental health services. Just a reminder, as far as the fiscal effects this proposition will have on the individual, this money is already being spent. It's just simply being reallocated to a new program, so there will be no increase in taxes for anybody.
So one issue to consider is while building housing for the mental health community is important, this will only happen assuming that the local zoning authorities actually approve these buildings, which I assume probably wouldn't happen in most cases. However, that being said, if the money doesn't go towards funding housing, they can simply funnel it back into the mental health services that it was originally from. We feel that having the funding to back housing for patients, if zoning allows it, is worth it. So it's a yes from us. So for Prop 3, it's looking to cover quite a lot of issues related to water, which we'll try and summarize nicely. This prop authorizes nearly $9 billion, the breakdown being over half of that towards assuring safe drinking water accessibility, and the rest to watershed and fishery improvements. Watershed being the area where rain and snow melt falls down into the river and streams that we use to get water. So these projects include things such as collecting and cleaning drinking water, recycling wastewater, buying key undeveloped land to keep it uninhabited, and upgrading current water facilities.
The priority of these projects will be to first benefit disadvantaged communities, meaning those with low, below average incomes. While most project developers will have their funding matched to carry these out, those benefiting disadvantaged communities will be funded in full. Water is another huge issue that's affecting us here in California, where in some areas such as parts of Porterville, citizens have no access to clean drinking water. Especially given our droughts, preserving water sources should be a top priority, and we feel this money will be a well-spent investment. We both say yes. There's a lot of issues that I think a lot of people believe are negotiable, but this is one I think is a non-negotiable issue.
Exactly. So essentially, preserving these water basins and making sure that we don't further disrupt the environment where we get our water sources from is our top priority. It should be everyone's top priority, really.
Last thing we have to say about Proposition 3, as far as weighing the negatives, just like Proposition 1, the government has to pay interest on those bonds and eventually pay all of it back, plus interest, of course. And there's nothing stated as far as how they're going to pay for that. So again,
That's right.
we've no idea what their plan is to make that revenue back to pay those bonds back. Proposition 4 seeks to allocate $1.5 billion worth of bonds to expand and renovate qualifying children's hospitals.
This is actually an extension of two previous propositions from 2004 and 2008, Prop 61 and 3 respectively. The funds for those propositions were used up as of this summer, so this proposition is looking to expand the funding for those children's hospitals further.
While researching the effects of these propositions or what they accomplished, the successes of Prop 61 and 3, we found surprisingly little results, which is very unfortunate, as in the future we would like to see some sort of record that the government keeps to show exactly what that money built rather than just the original proposal, what they said they were going to build. Because I'm sure most people share a certain level of skepticism as far as where government money actually goes versus where they say it goes.
Yeah, I think a lot of the kind of marketing for the propositions just goes towards saying this is how much money we're going to spend and this is what we're going to spend on it. And they just rely on the fact that people either support it or reject it at that point. Whereas, once you say you support it and it goes through, you don't really have any proof to see, what that money supported. Like for Prop 61 and 3, we know that that money went towards funding children's hospitals, but what did it really do? Like what did that money accomplish for us that we wouldn't have had otherwise? We couldn't find any information on it, and that's concerning for us for sure.
All the projects that Proposition 4 would fund would first need approval through the California Health Facilities Financing Authority, and they will only grant these funds based on a couple things, such as if the grant contributes towards the expansion or improvement of healthcare access for children who are eligible for governmental health insurance programs or who are low income, underserved, or uninsured. If the grant would contribute to the improvement of child health care or pediatric patient outcomes, or if the applicant hospital would promote pediatric teaching or research programs. Based on the trade-off between how much it could possibly raise their taxes versus what it's going to do to benefit California, I think we both agree. Vote yes on this.
So Prop 5 is looking to adjust some current rules regarding property taxes.
Listen up, fiscal conservatives.
So to catch you up, Proposition 13 in 1978 passed legislation that made it so not only could the state not raise property tax rates by more than 1% a year, regardless of how drastic property values rose, but it gave this group of citizens the option to transfer their current tax rate to a new home in California. This was to avoid getting hit with a much higher property tax rate. This essentially looks to protect people from feeling like they can't afford to move, even if they want to, say, downsize or move closer to family.
Now, what this proposition seeks to do is more generously expand this program to this group, as well as remove the limit on how many times they can do this. Under current law, they're allowed to do this once. It's worth noting that while this may likely stimulate the housing market, it may also lower the amount of funding to schools, as schools rely partly on property taxes for funding. However, California law requires that the state make up for lost funding from lower property tax revenue, so this is not really a huge concern to us. So the money is going to be there for the schools regardless of what happens to this.
Exactly.
In the long-term effect, it would actually increase tax revenue by the increased number of houses sold and bought. Because of this, we have mixed feelings. It's better to vote yes on this. So what is Proposition 6? It repeals the 2017 transportation law tax titled SB1 and fee provisions that mostly pay for repairs, improvements to roads, highways, and public transportation.
Part of this proposition is that they will require the state legislature to submit a measure before enacting any specified taxes or fees on gas or diesel fuel.
Based off the main two things that this proposition does, it's kind of a mixed bag because, for one, eliminating infrastructure spending, which we badly need, is a bad thing. It also gets rid of a lot of jobs. But on the other hand, it basically holds the government more accountable, and now if this passes, they will need the electorate's approval to add any gas taxes or any sort of fees to vehicles, like a vehicle registration fee. The gas tax, at least the part that this is going to be repealing, is on average about 17.6 cents per gallon. Meaning if you drive a car with about a 10-gallon tank, on average, you're only going to be saving about $1.76 every tank if this passes. We think that you're not actually going to be saving a lot of money if this passes, because on average most drivers at most are only going to be saving like $3.50, maybe $4 and per tank. But the thing is, I can't speak for everyone. My driving habits are way different than other people's are, and I know some people have jobs, like if you're an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, or if you're a truck driver, where driving is your way of living, and I know that's going to take a much bigger toll on you.
So according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, approximately 50% of the bridges in our state have exceeded their design life, and are on backlog for recommended maintenance and repair.
Repairs on nearly 4,400 bridges have been identified with costs estimated at $12.2 billion.
Furthermore, the condition of California roads is essentially the worst in the nation, ranking 49th according to the latest U.S. News and World Report ranking. So a few things to consider with this proposition is that while repealing it will save us a bit of money on our gas, as well as open up transparency towards future gas taxes, it's also cutting a lot of important funding regarding our road infrastructure. So while we agree that there should be more transparency regarding how we're taxed and exactly how much we're taxed, which voting yes on this bill would do, we feel that due to the state of our road conditions, we're by principle going to be against cutting any funding towards our road construction programs, which is why we feel that it's a no for Prop 6. So Prop 7 seeks to conform daylight savings time to Pacific Standard Time, where we would have no daylight savings time. And this doesn't matter. So Prop 7 looks to conform our daylight savings time to federal law on Pacific Standard Time.
We both agree that out of all the propositions, Prop 7 matters the least out of all of these.
By far. So it basically will allow legislator to approve changing our daylight savings time with a 2/3 vote if this passes. Now, while there are apparently studies claiming that heart attacks increase by 10% following a time change, according to the voter guide, we tried looking up these studies and we couldn't find any, only articles referencing those studies. There's also claims that this may make it dangerous for children walking to school, which I think is a fair argument potentially, but we couldn't find any evidence suggesting that either. There are also quite a few other countries who have stopped having a daylight savings time, so quite honestly, I don't think it really makes much of a difference.
Also, by principle, most of the time, we encourage any to vote for any sort of measure that would give the electorate a chance to vote on something like this does. Because this doesn't guarantee that we're going to get rid of daylight savings time.
Right.
It just says we're going to have a chance to vote for it. So, on principle, most votes that let people have a chance to vote on something like this does, then we're for it.
So, it's a yes from us, but we don't really care. Prop 8 is looking to regulate the amount dialysis clinics can charge patients, as well as prohibiting clinics from rejecting patients based on form of payment. As of now, some financial analysts have estimated that private health insurers are paying a markup of somewhere around 350% for kidney dialysis services for their patients. This bill would limit that profit margin to 15%, where any profits above that would be redistributed to patients or healthcare providers in the form of rebates. This would require chronic dialysis clinics to give annual reports showing the amount their revenues exceeded the specified cap set by the California Department of Public Health. These clinics would also pay a penalty of 5% of the amount of any rebates, with a max penalty of $100,000.
A few things worth considering include what they would determine as necessary costs versus profits. For example, there are certain positions necessary for the CDCs to remain funded by Medicare. If these positions, some of which are managerial, who still deal with patient care, weren't covered, the clinics would have to potentially adjust their funding significantly. We would want to be sure that this proposition fairly regulates the clinics. Also, considering that most clinics are for profit, there's a chance that states would have to change how dialysis treatment is provided. Overall, this doesn't concern us, as it is important to us that healthcare is provided to all kidney dialysis patients who need it, and regulating the amount of price gouging the clinics can do is an important part in maintaining the accessibility.
Right.
It's also worth noting that clinic union workers have heavily been backing this proposition, which by default, we typically support union workers. That being said, we will vote yes in Prop 8. What Proposition 10 does, it gives the right to enact rent control to local governments and cities, thereby repealing the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, a state law that limits how cities can apply rent control. Like what we said before, we generally are for any sort of initiative or vote that allows a more democratic process. In this case, it allows city governments to decide for themselves whether they want to enact rent control or not, because as of now, it's up to the state. For those who don't know, Costa-Hawkins, which is what this is repealing, it stated that cities can't enact rent control on housing first occupied after February 1st, 1995, and housing units where the title is separate from connected units, such as freestanding houses, condominiums, and townhouses. Now, many would argue that this doesn't solve the problem because we still need more affordable housing. However, other propositions in the ballot, like Proposition 1, are designed to take care of this problem. Many arguing for this, for like us, to vote yes in Proposition 10, are not denying that we also need to build low-income homes. But if we're going to take care of the insane housing market in California, we need to do both.
Also, some would argue this contributes to gentrification as it incentivizes landlords to instead sell the property and not use it for rent, thereby limiting supply of housing and prioritizing higher income individuals and families who can afford to buy a home. However, many landlords do this regardless, whether they're renovating the home and selling it on the market for hire, or when it becomes vacant, they renovate it and then they're able to rent it at a higher rate. This is really unavoidable. This could have a huge impact in some cities in California where more than 64% of the households are occupied by renters, meaning that rent control could benefit the majority of the population in those cities.
We also found a few studies that have been conducted to show the effects of rent control and if it's effective or not. And while there is some mixed conclusions, for the most part, they point to rent control helping people. So there's two main reasons we support a yes vote in Proposition 10. For one, it democratizes the process of rent control. So it lets city governments be able to vote for an issue like this. And cities know their community better than the state would. So that makes a lot more sense.
And again, just to drive the point home, that in some cities where the vast majority of the households are occupied by renters, we feel that a proposition like this benefits the majority of the California population. Prop 11 is looking to retract the requirement for ambulance workers to have off-duty breaks and lunches. It also requires employees to receive training on things such as managing violent patients, mental health patients, active shooter scenes, as well as providing ambulance workers with mental health services for their own.
So the concern of them having off-duty lunches and breaks is that it can potentially raise the cost of ambulance services by them not having enough widely positioned available units, forcing them to hire on more. While we are critical of the idea of not giving ambulance employees guaranteed breaks and potentially working while tired or hungry, it seems that, at least in rural areas, employees have a fair amount of downtime as it is. For urban areas where this isn't as much of the case, we're critical how this would be addressed. Overall, we feel we are in favor of this proposition, as apparently most other people are. If you look at the California Voting Guide, actually no one even submitted an argument against this proposition. But we are critical of how ambulance companies would handle higher traffic shifts where downtime is not consistent. So what Proposition 12 does exactly is it establishes minimum space requirements based on square feet for cows raised on veal, breeding pigs, and egg-laying hens. It also prohibits certain commercial sales of specified meat and egg products derived from animals confined in a non-compliant manner. It also requires egg-laying hens to be raised in a cage-free environment after December 31st, 2021. It defines sales violations as unfair competition, establishes new minimum space requirements for confining veal calves, creates a good faith defense for sellers relying upon written certification by suppliers that meat and egg products comply with new confinement standards, and requires the state of California to issue implementing regulations.
Passing this proposition means a potential decrease in state income tax revenues from farm businesses. Farm businesses can produce less animals due to the extra space requirements, so they produce less revenue. This would cost the state about $10 million annually to enforce these new rules. So obviously with these increased spacing requirements, the bill will likely be passed on to the consumers. That means any animal products you're purchasing are going to cost a little bit more so they can make up their profit margins. So overall, we do support this proposition. It means relatively better treatment for the animals. As far as the price hike goes, we feel that if you aren't happy with the price, you can just get your nutrition from plant-based sources, which are cheaper regardless of this price hike or not.
I hope that was a helpful analysis of all the propositions that are on the ballot this year in California. If you'd like to know more or if there's more details, as there are a lot more details, there's infinitely more details for all of these, then I highly recommend you go to Ballotpedia. That's a website that has text for the documents for the legislation. It has information on all the donors for both campaigns, for and against basically every proposition. So if you want to find what orgs were for or against any proposition, the actual text, other key points, Ballotpedia is a great source of information for all that kind of stuff.